This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? Well, with Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate. Then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This episode is brought to you by Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business. Want to advance your career or switch fields? An MBA from Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business can help. Earn your degree from a top-ranked business school with a thought-provoking curriculum, one-on-one leadership coaching, support from experienced career counselors, and full-time, online hybrid, and accelerated MBA formats. Join the intelligent future. Visit cmu.edu/Tepper to learn more.
I'd done one thing for 20 years, and I'd been told, where to be, when to be, what to wear for 20 years. And now all of a sudden I've got the freedom, and I joke, now I got to grow up.
Welcome to How To. I'm Carvel Wallace. Transitions are hard. Big moves, career changes, the endings of relationships, they all require us to let go of something that we've known well and step into an entirely new environment with new rules and new challenges. We try to cling to the old ways, but the old ways don't work here, and we haven't yet mastered the new ways. So there's this period, like a scary period of time, like a kind of a void, a no man's land where you are no longer in the old state of being, and yet not entirely in the new. You feel weightless and unsure, and you don't know what to do. Every year, about 200,000 military personnel face this void. Whether they've served a single term or they've made the military their entire career, they now have to move into an entirely new world and figure out how to operate. And military life is far different from civilian life. In the military, you're provided with food, clothing, shelter, structure, jobs, healthcare, even a sense of duty and purpose. In civilian life, let's just say those are things you need to find and keep for yourself, and sometimes over significant odds. This can make the transition difficult for a lot of veterans, and especially those who have experienced combat-related injuries or emotional or psychological trauma. Well, that's where today's listener comes in.
Hi, my name is Dan, and I'm calling in reference to veterans retiring from the military. So I'm a journalist that retired after 20 years in the Army, and kind of trying to figure out my way in the world at this point and grow up and have an adult job for the first time in my life. And so I'm kind of trying to navigate that right now between coming back from substance abuse issues and PTSD. And so it's a whole new thing. If you guys want to talk about it, that'd be great. You'll take care.
We definitely wanted to talk about it. And Dan had a lot to share.
20 years in the Army as a public relations expert, and then retired 3 months ago.
So when did you enlist? It sounds like you enlisted around the time of Afghanistan and Iraq. Was that part of your decision? What drove you to enlist?
So I shipped out in August of 2003. Iraq had just kicked off in April. Afghanistan had obviously kicked off October of 2001. But funny enough, I had actually walked out in protest of the Iraq War in college. I saw a lot of underappreciated, lower-income folks that were the only people going to fight. My father had gone to Vietnam 3 times back in the 70s because that's just what he thought was his duty. I grew up in a extremely liberal Southern California college town, very comfortable, played a lot of sports, went to college and all that kind of stuff. So I thought me as a safe middle-class white kid didn't have any excuse to sit this one out.
But there was another reason the military made sense to 23-year-old Dan. He realized his life was not really going anywhere, a feeling that was exemplified by one particular experience he had with his father.
I was out with my best friend, got my car towed because I left it near the bar, came out, it was gone. My dad had to drop me off to get it out of Hawk the next day. I'm 23 years old, been in college for 5 years. I was like, I need to grow up, right? So I went home, took the little online test. It said I like to be outside and I like to read. So it said I could either be a cavalry scout or I could be a journalist. And I said, oh, journalism sounds fun. I like to write. I like to be outside and do those things. And just going to do it for a couple of years to grow up. And then here we are 20-something years later.
And so tell us a little bit about, for those of us that aren't enlisted or haven't been enlisted, tell us a little bit about what public relations looks like in the Army.
One of the reasons I was drawn to public relations was because it allowed me to have still some form of creativity. I got to be a photographer as well and write. So I got to kind of still have that freedom outside of the military constraints. I could write on my own. I could, be kind of artistic in that. And public relations was, you deal with everybody from local city governments, and we dealt with all kinds of stuff in the community just so they got to know the soldiers and soldiers got to know them. And, we're obviously very loud, but it's dealing with all kinds of people, and I'm a people person.
I love that. Sounds like you really enjoyed the work.
I did. It was absolutely worthwhile.
Dan's job in public relations didn't just limit him to local communities. For a time, he worked as a combat correspondent, and that had an impact on him.
So in 2005, I was deployed to Iraq, and I was a journalist, and we lost a couple soldiers to a vehicle-borne bomb, and it was my first time covering it. And so I go down to the memorial ceremony at one of our other bases, and I take pictures, and I'm writing the stuff down and just being in the moment and experiencing it, and just started bawling my eyes out. I didn't know either of these guys. One of the senior leaders pulled me aside and said, "You must have really known these guys." I said, "I didn't." Through tears, I didn't know them. And at that point, I realized I couldn't maintain this for the entire year because this was the first month of a 12-month deployment. And so I just shut down. And some stuff happened just in my ex-wife's life and my life, and I was not a great person either, and got divorced and just kind of fell into medicating and the way that a lot of military people will tell you that we, I don't know what the right term is, but I won't say that it's promoted, but it's okay if you drink a lot. And so I drank a lot. So obviously not great, but I was very good at my job and got promoted and was doing well there and was physically fit. And then COVID happened and everything was taken away from me. So that was church, that was my kids, that was the gym, that was punk concerts. So all this healthy stuff. And so I turned to the bottle, and it got to the point where I was basically trying to kill myself. I was up to probably maybe a handle of vodka a day, starting at first thing in the morning. Otherwise, I'd throw up, hand shaky, just feeling like I was going to die. And I was okay with that to an extent, just because I was, kind of feeling adrift.
Dan's struggles with alcohol and mental health got worse, and eventually the consequences became unavoidable.
I made it through, luckily, because I had 18 years of spotless service and a terrible 2 years. So I had a girlfriend, we're not together anymore, but she was up here visiting me, and she was like, "I didn't know you were drinking this much, you need to quit." And I said, "Oh no, I just need to taper down." She said, "No," and said, "I'll stay with you, I've already called work, and if anything happens, I'll take you to the ER." And so I had no excuses. And, we'll go back to the military stuff. People tell you, you're going to do this, tough luck. We're used to saying, okay, fine, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And so she sat with me and I cleaned up. And so we're at like 4 months now sober.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate all that.
Now, recently discharged, newly sober, Dan is a civilian. And he's taking it one day at a time. And he's trying to navigate stuff that the Army used to navigate for him.
Like, one of the things that is really overwhelming is, I'll use real world a lot, but real world medical stuff, right? And I never had to deal with it, right? Like, you go to sick call at 6 o'clock in the morning, everything's free, you've got everything like that, right? Now all of a sudden I'm navigating like co-pays and what do I need for this? And I got to pay for meds. This is insane. Like, one of the places right here doesn't take my insurance. And I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this stuff. I worked at Lowe's for a little bit just to kind of find something. I was still getting paid as active duty, so I was just trying to find something to do. I'm disabled through the VA, through a bunch of stuff through the military. We can get into that later. But yeah, so I found something for a while and then found a national grocery chain that kind of vibes with me. And so I'm working there currently and absolutely love it. And I work there basically part-time, just kind of figuring out what I want to do, just kind of floating through.
Which brings us back to the big question at the core of that voicemail Dan left us. How do you figure out what to do with your life once the Army gives it back to you?
So I've got severe ADHD. So my long-term planning is absolute garbage. So each day now is I say, okay, what do I have today? I got, work. I got these appointments. I can knock those out, At the end of the day, right, I kind of take inventory of my day. What were the good things? What were the bad things? And regardless of the days, I have that where I can say, what I didn't do today is I didn't drink. So that long-term stuff is frightening, right?
It is frightening, but we don't have to do it alone. That's why today we're turning to a man who has spent years thinking about this exact issue, how to navigate the transition from military life to civilian life.
Yeah, hi, my name's Bob Beard. I'm a senior program manager at ASU's Center for Science and the Imagination, and I'm the principal investigator on the Veterans Imagination Project.
You're a former Marine, you've had your own experience with transition. What is your first reaction hearing Dan's experience?
I mean, a colleague of mine says, if you've met one veteran, well, that's it. You've met one veteran. But I'm completely struck by how similar, stories of service and post-service are, right? Thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think more people need to hear this.
The veteran experience is at the center of the program Bob runs at ASU. The Veterans Imagination Project encourages vets to think about the future, 5, 10, 20 years from now, and imagine how they'll fit into it. And they do it using techniques that few of those vets have ever encountered in their military service. We'll hear more about it in just a moment. Labor strikes, climate change, your crappy office printer, what do they all have in common? Come on, it's all about the money. Economics is everywhere and everything fueling our lives, even where we least expect it. If you're a fan of how-to and are curious to learn something new and exciting about economics every week, then you should check out Planet Money podcast from NPR. Planet Money is a different kind of world where the complex economy actually makes sense, where human stories supersede abstract theories. Listeners can learn, laugh, and be entertained. It's econ down to earth. Planet Money answers some of life's burning questions. Will AI take over our jobs? Is fancy vodka just fancy marketing? Why are Christmas trees so darn expensive? The Planet Money team lives to tell a good story in around 30 minutes. It's econ for the rest of us. Tune into Planet Money every week for entertaining stories and insights about how money shapes our world. Stories that can't be found anywhere else. Listen now to Planet Money from NPR wherever you get your podcasts.
This show is brought to you by Discover. In today's world, it seems the best treatment is reserved only for a few. Well, Discover wants to change that by making everyone feel special. That's why with your Discover card, you have access to 24/7 live customer service as well as $0 fraud liability, which means you're never held responsible for unauthorized purchases. Finally, no matter who you are or where you are in life, you'll feel special with Discover. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. Limitations apply.
We're back with our listener, Dan, who is re-entering civilian life after 20 years of service in the Army. We're also talking with Bob Beard about the program he runs at Arizona State University.
So the Veterans Imagination Project is based on sort of the principles of futures thinking. And futures thinking is a discipline sometimes called foresight or strategic planning or business intelligence that helps people create plausible and actionable visions of the future. It uses research and trend spotting and storytelling to tell these stories. Fortune 500 companies and nonprofits and government agencies will employ futurists to help explore these trends and imagine possibilities. And so in the past few years, we've seen these methods start to emerge for personal transformation. We've talked a lot about how there is a story that the military assigns to us as a member of the military. And so now, getting out of the military, I think it's incumbent on us to understand sort of, what I tell my students, who's the you behind the uniform, right? We spend 9 weeks with our veteran participants and they learn how to research a desired career field and sort of get to examine the influences and the impacts that define that field. We do that through foresight activities and pen and paper games and scenario planning and some speculative storytelling.
So what does all this mean? Okay, effectively, Bob is saying that mega corporations do all this work, use all these resources, take all of this time to imagine and plan for and position themselves for the future. And a bunch of tools have been developed to do that work. So why not give those tools to individuals who are trying to navigate an uncertain future? Why should corporations get all the future planning? One of those tools is speculative storytelling, which literally means, in part, having his students write science fiction. Yeah, because if you're going to plan for a future, you kind of have to imagine it first, and that takes time and focus. So that's our first insight. If you want to figure out what you're going to do in the future, then it makes sense to take some time and literally imagine the future itself. And writing is a great way to do that. But it's not the only way.
Our students will interview mentors in their chosen career field, and then they'll work together to identify trends and potential opportunities in those industries. And so they'll work not only with these mentors, but also the instructors and each other. They begin to start creating narratives about their future careers and not just, like I assume this is going to happen, but what if this happens? And then after working for a handful of weeks to sort of create these future-oriented scenarios, our participants meet with a concept artist, a person who works in movies and video games and books and comics. And together they help bring those future visions to life. Wow. And so you will see this very high-res concept art of the veteran in their future workspace. And what this does is they can see this possible future, and then they can start identifying some steps that they can take right now to get to that possible future. And then I think the other thing that's really important about having this really dynamic piece of visual art is that it's not just about this future vision that they fold and put in their wallet and look at every once in a while. We actually put these future visions on display. So we publish these online and do in-person exhibitions, and then we invite members of the public to come and view these visions and hear from the veterans themselves. Because, that's a huge part of veteran transition, right? It's not just understanding them as the stories that Hollywood tells us, right? Everybody's seen The Hurt Locker, right? And it's like, it's like so many people are like, oh, okay, well, I get it. I get it. And the reality is, no, you don't. So understanding the whole person is, I think, also essential to a veteran's transition.
One student who went through the Veterans Imagination Project is named Curtis.
Curtis was interested in gardening, and he had already started and created a food jungle and got a small grant to do that. So he already knew the things that he needed to do to sort of cope with his transition. And it was about, caring for plants and getting up every day and being accountable to this garden that he had created. And then working through the Veterans Imagination Project, he found a what-if opportunity in all of these social and technological and environmental and economic topics colliding. He found an opportunity to use vacant skyscrapers as a potential vertical greenhouse. So in the future, when remote work is perhaps the way to be from now on, how can we use these buildings standing vacant and turn them into gardens to feed our community? And so he really worked through the scenario. He talked to vertical gardening experts at ASU and created this vision of himself managing and maintaining vertical gardens. What was so fascinating about that is we did the in-person exhibition and we showed the art and we talked about the Veterans Imagination Project. And after Curtis showed his vision and started telling his story about this possible future, the story quickly shifted. And it was no longer about, well, what's Bob doing with the Veterans Imagination Project? It was, Curtis, how do we make this happen? And what was fascinating is that, there were members of the local Chamber of Commerce there, people that can actually make this vision come to pass. And those stories don't come out a lot of the time.
Okay, so if you were listening closely, you may have just heard our second and third insights. After taking some time to imagine the future, it's almost natural that you will start to imagine where you fit into it. Imagining quietly by yourself is nice, but it's not enough. It doesn't make it real enough. It maybe doesn't hold you accountable enough. So what Bob is talking about is two things. Number one, drawing that vision out on paper for real, like making it real, whether that's through collage or your oil paints or your raggedy little stick figures. You need to put that vision on the page and treat it as a real thing outside of just you. And the second thing Bob is saying is that corporations know you have to share that vision with your community. Not only does it make it real, but it also helps connect you with people who might be able to help. It's kind of like the saying goes, a vision is just a vision, but a shared vision is a force. And that force is desperately needed right now.
So I've got a question for Bob. First of all, I want to know how I sign up for this or how another person would like to sign up for this, because obviously, I mean, that's part of it. But this is absolutely fascinating that you're doing all that stuff. It sounds so fun. So I wish I had this kind of, at least as a choice, right? At my level, coming out.
Yeah, I'm with Dan. I mean, let's all go to the Veterans Imagination Project. But for now, it's a small university-based program that's still in the research and piloting stage. Meanwhile, the U.S. government runs an entire system designed to help hundreds of thousands of military veterans transition to civilian life each year. Dan just went through it.
It's called Transition Assistance Program, right? So there's a federally mandated program that every service member supposedly has to go through before they separate, whether it's retirement or separation. So everybody has to do this, but it's just like everything else that the U.S. military does, right? It's taught to the lowest level, and it's taught to as many people as possible at the same time. So they're just like, cool, we need to check the box, as we call it, and get out of here. And so Bob's doing this great thing, right, where you're picking those people who want to be there, right? Because a lot of times it's just, okay, fine, I have to go to these.
Yeah.
Right? We call it in the military voluntold. Like, oh, you have to go to this. You're like, oh, you don't have to, but wink, wink, it'd be really good if you did. And so you feel it's not, designed for you as a service member based on whatever it is, right? Because we're all, like Bob's saying, we're all so different at that point, right? We're the same at one point, but then when we're starting to transition, I want to go into education. Somebody else might want to be a truck driver. Somebody else might want to just sit on their butt, right? That's okay too.
Bob Beard went through that same program more than 2 decades ago.
I was in the Marines from 1995 to 1999. I'm a pre-9/11 veteran. I am not a combat veteran, and I worked in ordnance. So I stacked bombs on ships, and it was basically playing like high explosive Tetris. I got out of the military in 1999, and going through the transition assistance program, I was told what my options were. And my options for someone who worked with explosives were to become a police officer or a security guard. And what I find really interesting is that, I essentially had 4 years in supply chain management. And
Right.
I was a person who was very interested in technology and obviously very interested in the future. And I think about that all the time of, why didn't somebody tell me to go check out like that online bookstore up the road?
Okay, so for those of you who don't remember the dot-com boom of the 1990s, when Bob says that online bookstore up the road, he's talking about a little website that probably could have used some supply chain management when they were starting out. Of course, we're talking about Amazon.
My life could have been much, much different. And so really my purpose now is to sort of get in there as early as possible and let people know that there are other options and things that they can explore post-military.
Well, I'm curious. That's, really fascinating. And as someone who used to, I had a job once years ago where I helped kids that were coming out of foster care figure out what to do with their lives. So it was a similar situation.
I was going to say, that's very similar.
Right? So you had kids that were in and out of group homes, experience all kind of abuse and horrible things. Parents are gone. Now they turn 18. The city is basically like, our obligation to you is finished. Good luck. And that was in the state of California. And it like something like 50% of those kids experienced homelessness by the time they were 25. So the transition looked a little bit like what you described in terms of the transition and separation. It's like the city does the bare minimum, the county does the bare minimum, and that's where we come in. I hear a lot of value in what it takes to really sit down with someone and help them imagine the future. And I'm wondering, Bob, if you can tell us a little bit about why these two elements work, specifically seeing your vision like sketched up as a real concept and also sharing it with the community. Do you know much about kind of the psychology of why that works for people?
Well, I mean, we're very early in our research on that, but a lot of this is linked to a concept called episodic futures thinking, and the idea of using your sort of conception of your future self to manage goals and sort of delay gratification and to think of yourself as a person who continues in the future. There's some really interesting research that says that if you ask people across the board, regardless of sort of like, their socioeconomic status or who they are or where they live or anything like that, if they've changed a lot in the past 10 years. So, if I asked either of you, like, have you changed a lot since 2013? You're probably going to say yes. It's like, oh yeah, no, totally different than who I was 10 years ago. But if you ask those same people, will you be different in 10 years? Also across the board, there's this fallacy where they're like, nope, like I'm fully baked.
Wow.
Like I am who I'm going to be, and this is the way it's going to be. And that's just not true. So future self-continuity, I think, says that even thinking of yourself 18 months from now, you're sort of looking at yourself as a stranger. And so having this sort of like scaffolded approach and having this sort of first person narrative and then seeing yourself like third person, like seeing yourself in this possible future vision, you get to know your future self. So your future self is less of a stranger. So eventually you're going to become that person, so you might as well get to know that person now.
Oh, I love that.
And I'm overly simplifying this research, but in our pilot study, which we've just wrapped up, our pilot study was about, can the tools of futures thinking help military veterans in transition? And what we found through the research and a couple of the measures, looking at future self-continuity and also looking at futures consciousness, the capacity to sort of anticipate the future and be prepared for the future. We saw that, yes, that these tools can help veterans in transition. And so, the next phase of the work is, well, how and why and how can we make these instruments even more precise? How can we, rather than using sort of a blunt instrument, how can we, sort of use a scalpel and really get in there and help change people's lives for the better.
Coming up, we'll ask Dan to peer into the future and tell us what he sees. More in a minute. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Hold music. You want to avoid it, and so do your customers. So say goodbye to hold music and hello to faster, smarter support with Salesforce. Make service more personal and agents more productive using built-in trusted AI. Then watch costs and wait times drop and satisfaction soar. Support customers in a whole new way with Service GPT. Learn how at salesforce.com/service GPT.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something. Music.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.
We're back with Bob Beard of the Veterans Imagination Project, which is a part of the Center for Science and the Imagination at ASU. And we're also talking with our listener, Dan, a 20-year Army veteran, about his experience transitioning to civilian life. Dan, do you feel like you have an image or vision for what Dan might be doing or look like, or how Dan might be in 5 years? And if so, would you be willing to kind of like sketch that out with us here on the show?
I can sketch it out as best I know at this point, right? So we're My dad also has severe ADHD, but he obviously grew up in the 50s when nobody knew what that was. And so he came up with his own coping mechanisms, and he is extremely organized, even though he has chosen to have 14 different careers, not jobs, careers. I mean, I can't imagine what I'm going to be like in 10 years, right? So that future planning, like I was just talking to my roommate today, how excited I was that I started a 401k at my job. Like that's why I don't know how those things work, right? Again.
Yeah.
So for me right now, I still break up into small stuff. So for now, all I'm doing is basically 2 years out, I'm going to enroll in another master's program here in community planning, going back into kind of the service stuff, right? So it's dealing with nonprofits, kind of like what Bob was talking about with helping local communities, right? Getting that buy-in from governmental organizations, from non-governmental organizations, from city, local, state, whatever, all those different groups, right, is kind of what I'm going to go learn for and then help in the same area, right? So, and I don't think it'll be just veterans. I think everybody obviously needs it. We've got a huge underhousing crisis in the United States overall, and obviously we have that up here in the Pacific Northwest, just like most places do. So I just want to help, right? I just want to, my mom was a pastor, lawyer, all these different things, and we always helped, right, in our entire lives. And that's one of the things that with the imagination that Bob's talking about is I finally kind of have the freedom mentally to daydream, right? And gratitude, right? That's another, I'm learning all these mental health things is being thankful for, we can look back at the Army and whatever, and I can still say, well, no, my kids had medical care their entire lives. They can go to college wherever they want for free. I met some fantastic people. I got to do some great stuff. I'm still here. And so that 2 years, that whatever we're talking, 2 years, 5 years, that plan is to help and to set that example of still trying, right? Like we're talking about like 10 years, I don't know where I'm going to be, but I know that I'm going to, my core values, what I love, who I love, what I believe to be the right way to go about the world, kind of not causing harm to anybody and trying to help when possible. And I keep it short to that, to just a couple of years. I don't know how to plan that far out. I mean, honestly, to go back to your original question, I don't have a plan that far out, but I know I'm going to be sober during it, and that's all I need for now. And that's the other thing too, right? Is just being okay with where you are.
I couldn't help noticing that Dan's answer was less about what kind of job he wanted and more about what kind of person he wanted to be, what values he wanted to serve. And according to Bob, that's important because there's another thing about science fiction that matters to veterans making the transition. Most sci-fi stories are about people who adapt to do inspiring things in strange new worlds.
I think about this a lot because this center and this project is sort of based around concepts of science fiction. And so I ask people to think about some of their favorite or some of the most popular science fiction stories. There's Star Wars and there's Back to the Future. And ultimately, these are stories about plucky people, right? And they're thrust into extraordinary circumstances, right? And through guidance and practice and resilience, and I think most importantly, their own unique way of looking at the world, they do incredible things. Think about any science fiction movie. It's about sort of that unique individual perspective. We need to trust that we have that capacity. We need to approach things with curiosity. And we need to be okay exploring different ways of living and thinking and believing and behaving. Yeah, the military tells us to show up 15 minutes early or you're late. And there's a utility to that in the military. That's absolutely necessary. And I'm not saying don't show up early because, why not? But you don't need to be sort of locked into just that way of thinking, right? I also think that, science fiction is today's realism, right? Like even a year ago, we weren't thinking about generative AI. That was once just something that was only in our science fiction stories. And yet here we are. We're using the tools of science fiction to make sense of something that we're experiencing for the first time together. So the stories that we're telling are science fictional stories. And so, science fiction sometimes gets written off as something that's trivial and maybe not serious. But I think in navigating sort of that liminal space of being a veteran, you're no longer this, but you're not quite your final form yet. I think there's some real transformation that can happen. One of my former students said he was in the Marines and he was special forces in the Marines. And he said, I was really skeptical about this. I didn't think that this was going to work. What I needed to realize is that there's an element of vulnerability that I needed to sort of surrender to. And once I could open myself up to vulnerability, then it all sort of clicked into place. And I mean, vulnerability and surrender is not antithetical to the military experience, right? So I think, understand why you got out of the military and understand that it's a broad possibility space. And it's a space that we can play in, right? It's a space that there's a lot of opportunities as long as we're courageous enough to sort of, take that step into uncertainty.
That's another takeaway from Bob. Sometimes the biggest barrier to adjusting to a massive new set of circumstances is finding the license to imagine the possibilities and finding the courage to step into the unknown. Dan's already been doing both of those things for the past few months, so I wanted to ask him about his own advice to fellow veterans.
As people are transitioning, do everything the government tells you to do on those, but also reach out. There are so many opportunities out there like Bob's that are so specific and so helpful that aren't just, here's your commercial truck driver's license. Here you can go be a cop or, a sheriff or something. And those are the only two things that people go do when they leave the military. That's it. That's all you go do. Or you start your own business fixing people's uniforms for them because they're too lazy to do it. Right? There's like 3 things you can go do when you get out. But to have those other, people that, just think of it this way. Here's other things you can do. Like people caring about you in the military, like to have somebody where it's, let's sit down and talk is amazing. And I just encourage people to open your aperture and look at other things that are out there. Be amendable to being shaped, right? You've done that in the military. They break you down, they build you back up. We can do that. You've already been broken down physically, mentally, and spiritually and everything else in the military. Let's build you back up so you can do this healthy and really take what you've been given and continue just to be happy and to exist and survive and experience.
I love it. Guys, thank you both so much. I've really appreciated this. And it's just been a pleasure. It really has. And truly, thank you for your service, both of you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And Dan, really, really excited to meet you and chat more.
Yeah, I appreciate all you guys setting this up. Bob, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for everything. And just thanks for giving me the opportunity. And the thing is, if my story helps one person, right? I'm sure Bob feels the same way. If it helps one person, it's worth it. Find your tribe. That's it. Just find people that care about you and love you and support you. That's all you need to do.
We've posted links to the Veterans Imagination Project in our show notes. Do you have a strange new world that needs confronting? Send us a note at howto@slate.com or leave us a voicemail at 646-495-4001, and we might have you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, please give us a rating and a review and tell a friend. That helps us help more people. How To's executive producer is Derek John. Joel Meyer is our senior editor. This show was produced by Rosemary Belson with Kevin Bendis and Jabari Butler. Merritt Jacob is our senior technical director. Charles Duhigg created the show. Courtney Martin is my co-host. And I'm Carvel Wallace. Thanks for listening. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.